Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. With me tonight, as always, my good friend Drew Crowley. What's up, Drew?
Howdy, sir. I'm doing good. Uh, as of the time of recording this show, I think you and I just finished seeing a little concert together,
We
playing in a
did.
concert together.
Well,
So that was,
you played, I watched, yes.
yeah, we had a good time. So been a great weekend. About as happy as I get.
No, we really had a good time. You and the Wild Boys played. Um, uh, gosh, the name of the second band,
Shelby Lore.
Shelby Lore. I kept wanting to say Taylor Lore, but it's not Taylor Lore. It's Shelby Lore band. They were fantastic, man. They were
Hmm.
just really, really good. They rocked. And I told uh, Blue Williams after their set, I said, "Better bring your A game," and,
And they
and,
did.
and he did. Sweet lady was. They were terrific. Um, so just keep watching our page. We'll post all of their shows as well as obviously Drew and the Wild Boys. But we'll post when you can see Sweet Lady. They're doing a tribute to Tres Hombres. It's 50th year since that was released, and man, they just kill it. It is just
Mhm.
really, really good all the way around. So you will want to be sure to check that out if you're in the area. And if you're not, I know they've got an album coming out, I think, in August,
Mhm.
and they're supposed to be back on our show in about a month. So that'll be good. But we got some things we need to cover before we get back to part two of our conversation with Steve Gorman, talking about what's going on new with him, talking about the Some Girls album, which is celebrating 45 years since it was released. But first, let's talk about Bar Cart Co-op. Bar Cart Co-op is a collection of friends that produce content for the whiskey enthusiast. Whiskey enthusiast wants to have a good time. Okay, I don't think anybody on this bunch takes themselves too seriously. Distillers Talk. That is a show with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. They talk with distillers from across the country, around the world, about how the whiskey that's in your bottle, the spirit that is in your bottle, actually got there. How is it made? What mash bills and distillation techniques and all kinds of wonderful geeky stuff, and more wonderful geeky stuff is in Alan's One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. Distillers will email Alan questions, and then Alan will record video responses to those questions, usually 10, 12 minutes long. And just, you want to geek out on some distilling stuff, that's the show for you. Speaking of geeks, My Whiskey Den, every Monday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock Central. Pat and Mike and Mitch are there talking about craft whiskey because My Whiskey Den is where craft whiskey is king. Lots of good stuff going on. Always having a good time with the folks in the chat. Be sure to check it out. And then you have our show. So let's let Mike tell you about that.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. Hit that bell notification to find out when new episodes are coming out, which do come out every single Wednesday on all of the services: Spotify, Apple Music, Google, maybe Amazon, definitely YouTube. And always hit that like button, but hit it an odd number of times. So then that way it stays as a like.
Thanks, Mike. Always appreciate your contributions to the show. In just a minute, we're going to talk more with Steve Gorman about this album. Some Girls came out June 9th, 1978. We had just fantastic conversation with Steve about that. But Drew, anything going on new with you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, not a ton new for me, other than what we'll talk about out kind of towards the end of the episode with new releases and such. But
Mhm.
uh, as we are recording this, we are just a few days out from the release of the new Foo Fighters record.
Yeah.
I know you and I are both big time fans. I'm looking forward to
Yep.
seeing them in, I think, like 9 days.
Wow.
And so was curious to your thoughts on the record and kind of what they're doing now.
Um, Honestly, I have listened to most of the album. I have not listened to, well, I think I've listened to the whole album, but I don't think I've listened to it beginning to end uninterrupted. Okay.
Sure.
The new album is called But Here We Are, and it's the first album in a long time without Taylor Hawkins. Dave Grohl played all the drums in the studio on the album. You know, Drew, when some of the singles came out, I was like, okay, that's a Foo Fighters song.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like a little bit like a formula. It felt a little like if you'd said to some sort of artificial intelligence, make a Foo Fighters song,
Mm-hmm.
and this popped out. I don't know that that's necessarily fair. I think what we'll see, and as this is showing, you've probably already seen. I think people are going to fall all over themselves to praise the album, maybe even before they hear the album. And that's just because of the circumstance with
Mm-hmm.
Taylor passing, 15 months ago now, something like
Yeah.
that. I think people are going to want to, be first in line to say that this is great, and it may be great. But I think this is one that if you want to be very, I don't want to say serious, but if you want to be a little more sober about how you approach it, let it marinate a little bit. Listen to it a few times, and then say, yeah, this is great, or yeah, this is okay. I certainly don't think it'll be bad by any stretch, but I I think that there's a lot of promise here simply because it's a Foo Fighters album.
Mm-hmm.
I think that coming out of the loss of Taylor, I think there's a lot of really potentially fantastic, very raw, very real, authentic music that can be there. But if we're going to be very honest about it, I think just give it a few listens and see what you think.
Yep.
What are your
Absolutely.
thoughts? I know you've listened to it.
Yeah, I've listened to it a couple times. I am a fan of the Foo Fighters and will probably champion just about whatever they do. The one thing I will say for this record, obviously trying to give it a little space and looking forward to seeing what they do with it live. They are back to a heavier sound, which I really, really enjoyed. Concrete and Gold and Sonic Highways, the 2017, 2018, and like 2014 albums that they put out, lost me just a little bit. But this gets back a little bit more to the In Your Honor and Echo, Silence, Patience, and Grace records. And so I really love that. I love that Dave's back behind the kit. He brings just an energy that I think only he and Taylor really shared in that band. And so I'm really excited to kind of hear some of that tone come back. So we will see. And I will report back, I'm sure, on the show, tell you how the live version goes.
Yeah, because they've got Josh Freeze sitting in on drums, and that wasn't. I mean, first of all, and we talked about it with Steve. I don't know that I necessarily thought that they would keep going on as a band after Taylor passed, but they have, and I think that can be very exciting. But we'll see. I'll look forward to hearing your report on the live performance. That's for sure.
Very good.
But we've got part 2 coming up with Steve, and again, in his honor, we're drinking a little Johnny Drum. I think this bottle's like $25, $30 maybe. It's non-age stated, 101 proof, Willet. But if you don't want to spend the hundreds of dollars it will take to get one of those purple foil Willet bourbons, first of all, you can drop down to like Noah's Mill, and that's really good, and that's for like $60-$70, and I love that. But if you're on the cheap, or you're out at a bar and you see this sitting behind the shelf, grab it. I mean, just
Snag
say, hey,
that.
I'll take it. Yeah. Any other thoughts on some Johnny Drum?
Nope. I shared it earlier on last week's episode, but it's just a lot of cinnamon, a little bit of that grape candy thing, and then that sugar cookie back end. Just really, really enjoy that a tremendous amount.
Yeah. How could you not like? I mean, that's a great combination.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of those are things that when I find them separately in a whiskey, whether it's that cinnamon note or that fun dip note or that sugar cookie, that's something that you got me on, because I hadn't really thought about that being there on the back end, but it absolutely is. I mean, any one of those, I really am gonna dig in a whiskey. But you put all three of them together into something that's like $30 for a bottle. Yeah, I'll do that.
Hard to argue.
I'll do that. Yeah. Oh man. So without further ado, let's get into part 2 of our conversation with Steve Gorman.
And, this album, Some Girls, it's funny you wanted to talk about this one because everybody talks about the big four, which the big, Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, Sticky Fingers, Exile on Main Street. I was a toddler when all those records came out, and a little boy and a little kid. Some Girls was the first Stones record I actually purchased. That's the first one that I went to the mall to buy, like with my own money, like I'm getting that new Rolling Stones record. And I grabbed the album and I rode home on my bike, holding it in one hand on the handlebar, one hand holding the album. And I rode home and I put it on and I just listened to it 50 times in a row. So that's like my Stones album, It's not the one I've listened to the most in the last 30 years, but in 1978, I listened to it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And, up until that point, I had been such a Beatles guy. And, I've said for years, my two favorite drummers are Ringo and John Bonham. Those are the two drummers that have stamped me the hardest.
Right.
Where without thinking, that feel, that swing, that's everything. But it was when I got Some Girls that Charlie Watts entered the conversation in my young brain of, what about that guy? There's just a vibe there. So this album was always like that. Some Girls is my Stones record, as far as which one hit me in the head with a hammer the most in real time. It was the first time it ever happened, and it did a pretty good job.
Yeah. So when you look at Charlie entering your consciousness, basically with that song, or with that album, how did that affect the way that you played, especially when you're looking at your band, the Black Crowes, and what they were doing musically? How did Charlie fit into if you're looking at influences between Ringo, John Bonham, and Charlie Watts, how did that kind of shape itself?
And the band Mr. Crow's Garden in 1987 and 88, I was probably leaning on Charlie way more than Ringo or Bonzo, because I wasn't playing any fills. Like I didn't buy a drum kit till I was 21. So I was way late in my brain. I was starting late. And the whole thing to me was just lay it down, just be the foundation. And drum fills, we'll get to those later. Like my initial approach was just kick and snare in time. Don't speed up, don't slow down. Just make it feel consistent. And the consistency is, that's like Keith Richards always said Charlie was the engine room of the Rolling Stones. and you could even say he's the engine room of rock and roll for a certain extent of time.
Yeah.
It's just that you're grinding it out. You're the guy. No one's going to notice until you screw it up. Like that was my goal in the early days. So first time ever in a recording studio, you definitely recognize there, like, oh man, like if you aren't laying down the groove, it doesn't matter what you do, Phil. It doesn't matter how flashy you are. Like that's when you recognize, like, yeah, the balcony's cool, but what about the basement? Like, do you have the foundation? And so Ringo and Bonzo were the guys that made me feel a certain way, but Charlie was the guy that I said, but that's what I got to figure that out first.
Yeah.
And if that makes sense. And so that was, and, I could go right back to, and by the time I was actually in the studio, I had all the Stones records. I was very well versed, but you still go back to that early stamping on your brain. In my drummer's DNA, it was Some Girls, I mean, it's just in the fucking pocket, just boom, 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 no matter what, right there on time. And I've said for years, Shattered is my favorite Rolling Stones song. And I won't say it's the best Rolling Stones song. It's not the greatest Rolling Stones song. They have iconic tunes that are epic, that say a lot more about my life than Shattered ever could. But Shattered's my favorite song because the first time I heard it, it was just so menacing and badass. And just that groove in that song, I was like, man, that is it.
Yeah. Well, Miss You is my favorite Rolling Stones song. So we've got this one bookended. Again, not necessarily the best Rolling Stones song.
Well, it's funny too, because people just rip them apart for playing that disco beat, and Four on the Floor. And, the Stones were just men of their time, and they were going to dance clubs in Europe, and they were listening to that, and they were seeing what got people moving. And it wasn't Keith as much, but Mick and Charlie, especially. Charlie Watts was the guy who really loved dance music, and he loved that just kick drum driving Four on the Floor stuff. That was him.
Yeah.
Charlie's the guy who invited Steve Jordan into the studio in Paris in '77. Said, "Hey, come hang out with us." I mean, it all started with him. I mean, Keith grabbed him for the expensive winos years later, but Charlie was the guy who said, "No, come on, man." He loved going to those disco clubs and dance clubs and seeing people just out there having a blast. And so, as much, it's funny to look back and realize people hated the Stones for Miss You in real time, or critics did, or purists and rock purists. I hear that song now and I just think it's just brilliant. It's perfect.
Yeah. Now, Drew, you were probably negative 20 years old when this album came out. So before I said, "Hey, let's talk about the Some Girls album," had you listened to this album before, or are you just familiar with some of the songs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll preface my answer with the fact that I was raised in a very religious home and probably didn't hear anything that wasn't on the contemporary Christian charts until I was 12, 13 and started going away from parents. So I knew Beast of Burden and I knew Miss You. I had heard those before. And I think Beast of Burden was even like on a rock band game that I played in high school at some point. But honestly, up until 3 or 4 weeks ago, I don't think I'd sat down and listened to the whole record front to back. And now I've gotten through it 4 or 5 times and I love it. But yeah, this is kind of a new introduction for me. So I was excied.
Yeah. So I'm jealous that you had that experience to listen to the whole thing like that.
I think that all the time. That jealous thing. Like I was working. There's a singer-songwriter guy named Joe Firstman. He's been in Nashville for a long time, but I met him in LA in 2002. He was 21 years old and he just signed a deal with Atlantic Records. He's a great, incredible talent. And I handed him songs from Big Pink, which he'd never even heard of. And I gave him a couple Warren Zevon records, and I gave him Houses of the Holy. And every time, and here's a 21-year-old kid at the time who was brilliant, understood music, understood songwriting. He had everything. And it would just come up like in conversation. Well, on Big Pink, he'd go, "What's Big Pink?" And I'd go, "Oh, what, seriously?" And go get him the CD. And then,
Yep.
the next time I'd see him, he'd be like, oh my God,
Right.
and I used to think every time, I was like, God, I'm so jealous. I'd love to hear that for the first time right now.
Yeah.
The day Charlie died, Trigger Hippie was playing a gig up in Lake Placid, New York. I got up that morning, and at some point late morning, I just looked at Twitter and I saw that Charlie died. And it was just, it just was like a hammer to my head. And we played a gig that night, and we were all just out of sorts, the whole band, and even the younger people in the band. There's a couple of people in that band who were in their early 30s, and they were just like, whoa, like, you've lost a compass for rock and roll music for sure.
Right.
And the next day on the drive to wherever we were going next, I just put on Some Girls. It was like, I'm listening to this thing start to finish, man. I got to. And I had it just cranked, and I'm driving along, and it just, it was sad, but it just made me so happy at the same time. And that record, everyone thinks of it as when they went disco, but it's also their response to punk. There's a lot. It's very it's like, oh, you think the Sex Pistols are cool? You think that means something? And you just put on those. It's just flying, some of that stuff, and it's just so gnarly. That was really the Stones coming up with a whole new sense of musically. No, I don't mean musically, but just vibe wise. They were like, hey, we're still the Rolling Stones. And a lot of artists famously discussed the late 70s. Pete Townsend, when punk took over, he figured he was done, and they get, a million artists have talked about it. And for the Stones, it was like, oh, you think you guys are badass? We'll show you badass. And not only that, we'll jump into some disco too. So fuck all of you. It was just such a fist right in the face of preconceived notions in a way. Like, we'll get even leaner than ever and angrier than ever. And that record still holds up to me.
Yeah. And you talk about being leaner. They had been getting into the ritual on their studio albums of, bringing in all these outside musicians. On Some Girls, it was very, very limited.
Yep.
You had Sugar Blue, I think. Sugar Blue playing harmonica. Mel Collins played the sax on Miss You. And Ian McClagan played keys on a couple songs.
No, it's just true badass. This is a rock and roll band reasserting that they're a rock and roll band. No matter what you want to label things, this is still, I think they always understood, especially after what they'd gone through in 69 to 73 with those albums, 72. Like, when we want, we're still untouchable. We can get to those places. And I don't think Some Girls was a scene in real time like that, but it certainly sounds like that to me now. It's like nobody else can do what they were doing right then.
Yeah. You talked about the big four for the Stones, and that basically went from 68 to
end of
72?
68, end of 68 to 72. To spring of 72. It's less than 4 years. On a calendar. It's incredible.
Right.
It's like Led Zeppelin 1 came out in January 69, and Led Zeppelin 4 came out in 71.
Right.
Like,
it's insane.
Take a minute with that one if you want. It's like there were some moments where bands just said they're just in the zone. It's like magic trick. And for the Stones, it's those big four. But again, if you're the Stones, if it's only rock and roll and black and blue, if that's you bottoming out, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
It's like when it's just the funniest thing in the world. It's like Jay Moore, the comedian, said when Keith Richards fell out of a coconut tree in the Fiji Islands and smashed his head open, and that's when Keith decided he probably needed to get sober. And Jay said, if your lowest moment is falling out of a coconut tree in the Fiji Islands in your 60s, you won, dude. Like, that's your bottom. And when I look at the Rolling Stones, I'm like, Black and Blue was your bottom? Really?
Yeah.
If Black and Blue came out right now, people would say, if Black and Blue were released right now, the band that put it out would be heralded as the saviors of rock and roll music.
No, you're right. You're right. But if you go through the Stones discography, it is not what anybody's going to say.
No.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite.
Of course, not at all.
Yeah. But
it's just when you knock out, when you're hitting home runs, man, people forget how cool doubles are.
Yeah. Well, they went through some lineup changes because, well, first of all, it was Brian Jones' band to start with. Mm-hmm. And then Mick and Keith kind of commandeered it. And
I think Brian, yeah, and I totally understand that's true. But Brian he put himself on the margins pretty quickly. I mean, it wasn't it was not very long into their career before it was pretty clear who was calling the shots and who was running the show and who the real special talent was. And that's not to say Brian Jones wasn't talented, but if you can't show up,
right,
you can't show up. You know what I mean? And at some point, like somebody said, like, well, when Mick and Keith when they're the level-headed guys, like, dude, come on, there's a point when you realize. And as much as I can appreciate what Brian Jones brought to that band, their highest heights were all achieved after he was gone, in my opinion, artistically.
Well, he was wasn't he on Let It Bleed? I mean, yeah.
But peripherally, he was not super involved. I mean, he was already on the outs.
Right.
He was just struggling to hang in there.
Yeah. Well, they booted him out and brought in Mick Taylor.
Yeah. That's and again, that's the. It's not just that Brian was gone. Mick and Keith, of course, had their songwriting. That's when they hit a groove. That's when they sort of reinvented what rock and roll music was or could be, truly. Mm-hmm. And so it's a conversion of events. Like as Brian leaves and as Mick comes in, Keith and Mick are at their height of their powers.
Yeah,
they're at the height of their focus. And so it's more than just simply saying, oh, Brian left and Mick Taylor came in. Like in any band, there's a million extraneous circumstances, but just the way it worked out for the Stones, that's when they hit their apex to me, was in that period as Brian was, exiting stage left. Then they happened to bring in Mick Taylor, who was just a special unicorn in that environment. And it just the records speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We can argue all day about how it went down and who did this and who did what, but 50 whatever odd years later now, put the records on. And honestly, they do speak for themselves.
Absolutely.
Those 4 albums have, if you put those 4 records if you put a track list in alphabetical order and remove the idea of which came out on what, you're just going,
you don't know.
50 songs that I can't even believe exist, much less in a 4-year period. They're all incredible.
Yeah.
It to me, it matches Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, White Album, Let It Be Abbey Road. It's the same. It's the first 4 Zeppelin records, or it's whatever you want. It's just that zone that they got into where they just created their own universe.
Yeah. And then in 78, here's the guys. That's a good looking group of dudes. I'm not really sure Keith knows where he is at the moment, but this was the first album where Ron Wood was an official member of the Rolling Stones.
Right. He was on Black and Blue a little bit. He did the 75 tour.
Yeah.
But this was his first full, like, I'm here. And Ronnie was so incredible and unique in the faces as a guitarist too. It's like, that guy will never get the credit he deserves for figuring out how to be in the Rolling Stones, because when he was in his own band, he was phenomenal and unique. And he was in a band where there wasn't another guitar player.
Right.
it was him and Mac on keys. Ian McLagan was playing keys, and it was just, to figure out how to blend in with a guy like Keith. I mean, that's not easy because Ronnie Wood is no one's idea of a Mick Taylor replacement. He's from another whole planet.
Mhm.
And he really, it's almost like watching a golfer become a great tennis player. Like what Ronnie played like in the Faces, and then what he did in the Stones, it was like two other planets.
Yeah. But to me, that's one of the things that makes Some Girls special.
I agree.
Is the way that Keith and Ronnie played together on that album. It's like seamless.
Well, that's when they found it. That's when they found it. That's when they realized what they could be together. When it all, first time you saw it really click and make sense.
Yeah. So you talked about this is rock and roll, and one of the things that's very rock and roll about this album is the cover, which gained some controversy in and of itself from Lucille Ball. Well, basically they took an old catalog company's advertisement, and then those were cutouts that you're seeing in where the faces are, and the first pressing of this, they had Lucille Ball and Farrah Fawcett and Judy Garland and Raquel Welch and Marilyn Monroe's likeness on the album cover, without any permission whatsoever.
Yeah, man. Who cares? We're the Rolling Stones, whatever.
So
they'll figure it out.
Yeah, and so they ended up having to change the album cover a couple of different times. But the other thing that is, well, first of all, this album as it is right now would not be released today.
No, of course not.
Right,
not
and
a chance.
The title track is the reason for that. We won't get into the. If you're wondering why, just listen to the song "Some Girls." Okay, Mick in some of the lyrics has some very.
Well, there was a, and I mean, I'm not gonna like go to the wall defending the lyrics, because I don't know what the thinking was at the time, but I always interpreted that as, it's like Jason Isbell's been very eloquent, I think, about explaining that just because I'm writing lyrics doesn't mean it's about me. Like, at a certain point, it's like, do you honestly think Arnold Schwarzenegger walks around and says, "I'll be back"? He's playing a part. Right. And a singer-songwriter oftentimes is presenting an opinion or the views of a person or of, in the case of Some Girls, of a lot of people, and a reflection of what people thought and said at the time in a good or positive or negative way. You can lose the context, really. I guarantee you in 1978, there were people that were offended by that song with good reason. But there were plenty of people who saw it very differently, who in the modern era would suddenly be very offended, but wouldn't. Context is everything. Hey, Chauncey, I'm talking about Some Girls, dude.
Chauncey's offended.
He's horrified. Come here. He's changed since we moved to Minneapolis. In Nashville, he wouldn't have said a word. No, it's just, I mean, but at the same time, I mean, we're in a period of time right now when, lyrically, to your point, this would never be released right now. Or if it were released, it would be released only to piss people off or only to get attention. It would never be released as a genuine, it's just what I wrote. Right. Like, you could never put this out without a reason behind it now. In 1978, it was just what Mick wrote. Yeah. It was just a reflection of whatever he was experiencing and hearing and thinking and seeing. The Rolling Stones have, in their personal relationships with other musicians and other artists and all kinds of people, you could never in a million years make the case that they were bigoted people. They were anything but.
Right.
But that lyric exists.
Right.
And so, again, context is everything. In 2023, sure, it's not going to happen. And Mick decided to not sing it anymore, which I totally respect. I get it. But that doesn't mean it was wrong then. If it's wrong now, that's okay, too. I just look at all these things as if we're in a period of overcorrection, that's okay, because we were undercorrected for centuries. Like, this is still a very small period of time we're going through. But to your point, at the time, it was in 1978. Man, just I look at art, and I skew very much towards what would now be called, I guess, progressive, or just culturally speaking. I'm not even talking politics. I just mean culturally. I can fully understand why people hate these lyrics now, but I also can say, but I was there at the time. It wasn't that big a deal, and that's the reality. It's Are we better now? I don't know. Give me 20 years, and then I'll tell you. Because to try to make decisions in real time about what is reality is almost always a sucker's bet. Just look at the Best Picture Oscar winner every year, and then to remind yourself, or Album of the Year in the Grammys. How many of them does anyone give a rat's ass about 5 years later? You know, It's like, give everything a little time.
Yeah. Speaking of Grammys, this was the first Rolling Stones album ever nominated for a Grammy,
which is hilarious.
Yeah, I know. You rattle off like Exile on Main Street, and
people can talk about it. Look, and I get totally that Exile is the greatest rock and roll album of all time. I understand the significance of that album, but in real time, it was overlooked a bit. What wasn't overlooked is Sticky Fingers, which is 10 masterpieces. Sticky Fingers is 1, 2, 3. I mean, it's 1 through 10, unassailable. And the fact that the Grammys were like, meh. I mean, what was nominated that year? Like Tony Orlando and Dawn or some shit. You know what I mean? It's like, it's hilarious.
No, I mean, I just pulled up the track listing for Sticky Fingers, and
it's absurd.
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense. That's the greatest hits album.
Can't You Hear Me Knocking may be the best opening guitar riff I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah. Every bit of that record. And it's not all pop hits. I mean, Sister Morphine's on that record. That's a dark track, man.
That's a very dark track.
And Moonlight Mile is unlike anything else the Stones have ever recorded before or since. But that is 10 songs that are like, I love Exile on Main Street. I love it. I absolutely adore that album. Yeah. But if you're going to look at me and say you got one or the other, I'm taking Sticky Fingers.
Yeah.
Which, to my original point, I don't think Some Girls is the best Stones album, but it's my favorite because it means the most to me because of what it meant to me when I bought it.
Yeah. So where do you, and you've kind of alluded to this, but where do you see this album, Some Girls album, really falling in line in Rolling Stones history?
Oh, I mean, it's 5 or 6, and I'll listen to any arguments. In my mind, the big four are the big four, and it's 1 through 4, and I don't care what order you put them in. Honestly, put them in whatever order you want. I'll take those. So Some Girls can be at best number 5. Okay. And that'll work. If you call it 6, that's fine. If you call it 7, I mean, whatever. Then it just comes down to taste, and it's perfectly subjective. I don't think there's any question that the big four are the first 4 on any list of greatest Stones albums. Yeah. But this one is 100% top 10. If you tell me it's not in their top 10, then I'm gonna laugh at
you. Then yeah. Let's talk about a few of the other tracks on there. We've talked a little bit about Miss You and touched on Shattered. We may talk about that a little bit more. When the Whip Comes Down, that was
incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, just the whole album's just such a kick in the ass. It really is just and you think about the time, like right now, when you think of bands you say, oh, they're 20 years in, that's not unusual. But in 1978, to say the Rolling Stones were 15 years in, that made no sense to people. No other bands had been there. They were the first band. The Beatles went 8 years as a recording band, right? Nobody was 15 years in 1978. I mean, you had artists. Chuck Berry was still recording and playing gigs, and you had people still touring, but no bands. No band. They're the first real long-term band, and they were nowhere near 20 years in when they made this record. But at the time, people thought, man, what a jolt. Oh my God, they can still do it. It speaks to how different that era was.
Right.
That at 15 years in, they needed like a shock. They needed to plug back in and be so cool again. I mean, I remember watching Saturday Night Live when this album came out. And they came out on SNL and they did 3 songs just in a row. Like, we're just gonna do what we want. We're the Stones. And it was cooler than, and there were, again, it was more punk than punk could have ever imagined being. You know, it was real, and they were just laying it out there, man. You know, I think now when you look at the way bands' longevity, I mean, when's the last time the Stones made an album that was truly relevant? Well, it's been a really long time. But I saw them in November of 2021 in Atlanta with, you know, Charlie was gone. Steve Jordan was playing, and it was incredible. It was, they're not 21. Was that, wait, what are we now? 23? It was 21, November 21.
Yep.
And it was amazing. And when they kicked into Tumbling Dice, I was crying. And they played Shattered that night, which they never play. And they kicked into it. I was like, oh my God. You know, it was amazing. Like, they are, I think records like this, and even Tattoo You, which got destroyed when it came out, you put on Tattoo You right now, and it's like, man, that's a badass band. It's mostly from the same sessions. Yeah. Paris 77. But
yes,
the fact is, it's like, no, man, that was still it's funny to think about the idea of a band being around for 20 years didn't make sense at that time. Nobody could imagine it. And now it's like 20 years in, you're just getting started. You know, you're a real band for real. Like 20 years is nothing.
Yeah, Mick and Keith were in their mid-30s at that point.
Yeah,
in 78, and people are thinking, "Oh, these guys are getting old."
In 78,
how much longer are they going to do this?
In 78, that was very old for a rock and roll. I mean, it's the oldest. That was the oldest. You couldn't, you know, they were it. The Beatles were long gone.
Yeah. Before They Make Me Run is the Keith Richards song on here.
Great tune.
Which, I think that was written a lot in response to his legal troubles and
in Toronto,
heroin and addiction.
Yep. Yeah. It just, you know, Keith, as Keith became, to me, I've always looked at it like, as he became more of a caricature, the rock and roll pirate, at the same time, he became more of just that guy. He also started writing real songs. Like, as a true artist and as a writer, he got real and elevated. But then he just started turning into that character that we all associate him with now. Yeah. And so I guess he needed one to make the other one make sense or something. But, you know, if you look at Stones footage from TV shows in the 60s in black and white, Mick is Mick. He's fully formed by 65. And Keith is still like kind of awkward. He's looking at the camera and hoping you don't notice that he's looking at the, you know, you can tell he's trying to figure out how to be this rock guy. And by the mid 70s, he's starting the whole like, oh yeah, you know, the ramshack of that Keith thing we associate now, which I've always looked at as that's just such an act. It's such bullshit. But at the same time, then he started writing songs like Before They Make Me Run. You know, he started really, he was able to cut down all the pretense for his songs, and then he just figured out the character he needed to be on stage.
Yeah. Drew, do you have a favorite off the album?
It's really tough, only because I'm only recently familiar with more than just a couple of them. I would say Before They Make Me Run is going to be in my top 1 or 2. And then Beast of Burden only because it has, you know, early memories for me. are up there for me. But I'm
Yeah.
probably the least educated person to be entering in this conversation, so I'd love to hear y'all's favorite ones as well.
It's just whatever's on. I mean, honestly, it's all just. Like I said, Shattered's always my favorite. I can never hear that song and not just find that. Oh man, like it gives me goosebumps. Like it will never won't. You know.
Yeah.
You know, but like Faraway Eyes, I enjoy that even as hokey as it is. You know, like Mick just bullshitting his way through that, and Keith was so angry at him for singing it that way or talking his way through it like that.
Yes.
But at the same time, it's like, man, a chorus is a chorus. You can't argue with it. It's great.
You know, even at this, a lot of the early Stones albums, they were doing covers, and you
Yeah.
talked about, you know, they were ripping off the old Chess Record guys, but even on this album, they did a cover of a Temptation song, "Just My Imagination."
Incredible. Yeah.
And it's a fantastic version of that.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a throwaway. I think it was really, really well done.
It's you know, like different people that have worked with them in the studio, from Jimmy Miller to Don Was or whoever. You read interviews and they all say like, there's just this vibe this band finds. You can do 22 passes of a song and everyone's just banging their head against the wall, and then all of a sudden, like for one take, this external magic aura appears and they just find it, you know. And like when you hear Just My Imagination, it's like you can imagine a band trying that song 1,000 times, but they found the one take where it's just it's special. It feels perfect.
Yeah.
You know, like from these same sessions came Start Me Up.
Yes.
You know, Start Me Up was a reggae song. They wrote that as a reggae tune. That's what it was. They did take after take after take, you know, with a reggae groove. And then someone said, "Hey, let's try one with a straight groove." And they played it once, and then went back and tried it again as a reggae song. And 3 years later, Keith digs through the tapes, and here's the one take they did. That's the one we all know. Like they're just this. They just had this ability to conjure magic, you know, even if they didn't recognize it in real time. But and you know, like you think about these takes, like the more, you know, they're the kind of band, and the Beatles are the same. Any great band's the same way. But the better you get as a musician and as someone who's recording, especially, the better you get, and the more you learn, the better this get. The more you realize how amazing this is. You could pick apart Some Girls and say the songs are simplistic and the grooves are simplistic and it's this and that and the other, but it's okay. Well, then you and your friends go do that.
Yeah.
Good luck, because they never lost sight of where the magic is, and you can't define it. You can't chase it. It's just, if it's there, it's there, and if it doesn't show up, I can only imagine how many thousands of hours of tape there are of this band playing that they recognize it's useless. And then 2 minutes later, the same band whips out Before They Make Me Run. You know, like there it is. It's perfect. It's magic.
Yeah.
Print it.
The thing that I think is just amazing about this is you had Keith with his legal distractions.
Yeah.
And you're bringing in for all intents and purposes, a new member of the band, a new guitarist in the band. And the recording sessions were prolific enough that you not only made Some Girls, you basically made Emotional Rescue, which came out, I think, 2 years later.
Oh, right. Yeah. I went to Tattoo You.
And then Tattoo You came out in 81 or 82.
Yeah.
So you basically got 3 albums worth of material off of these recording sessions with your, you know, lead guitarist and writing partner dealing all that he was dealing with, and Ron Wood coming in. And I think that speaks a lot to Ronnie Wood and his talent and his ability to say, okay, like you were talking, I played this way with Faces. Now I need to be able to adapt.
Well,
to
yeah,
this situation.
in any band, if you are bringing in a new member, the band's not gonna. No band is going to change how they play to make that guy fit in. It's like that guy has to find out how to fit in.
Right.
I experienced that in my own band. Every time we
Right.
brought in a new player, you know, Metallica didn't look at Jason Newsted and say, "How can we make you feel at home?" It was like, "Dude, figure this out."
Yeah.
And there's a billion examples. It's like when you join a band, it's 99% on you to figure out how to make it work.
Right.
Because the band ain't going to go back and explain what they've just been through. And they, you know, that's just not how these things work. I think, so it's a huge credit to Ronnie Wood. At the same time, I remember reading when Keith Richards' book Life came out, you know, Keith is a genius, like for real. Like he's a brilliant human being. And you could say he's not terribly well educated, or you can say whatever people want to say about him. And he's thrown away years of his life with drugs and alcohol and all that stuff. And yeah, that's all true. But at the essence of what he is and who he is, if you read his book Life, there's just such a deep, innate understanding and acceptance of the human nature of himself and of other people. I mean, when I read that, I was just it's hard to put into words, but I was blown away by, to me, just what a brilliant guy he is. And I think Mick Jagger's brilliance in a lot of ways speaks for itself, but people want to look at Keith as, oh, he's just a druggie, whatever. No, man, he's really, really, you know, guys that are behind bands that achieve these kind of things, like Jimmy Page, pretty brilliant guy. He's a smart person. Whatever you think of any of these people, Roger Waters or Paul McCartney, these are smart guys. You know what I mean? Like they just have a real, a tremendous depth to them. And whether you appreciate it or like it or not isn't the point, but you cannot argue it. Chuck Berry, to this day, Chuck Berry is a genius. His lyrics are so simple and so direct, and they just planted the seeds for everything that followed. To this day, you cannot get better than Chuck Berry's rock and roll lyrics. It's just like astounding. The older I get, the more I experience, the more I'll hear a Chuck Berry song and go, my God, that's amazing. You know, I mean, just like the greatest athletes of all time are really smart people. Who's your favorite basketball player? He's a smart guy. Trust me, whoever it is, he's a pretty smart guy. You know, the reason Jokic, right? You know, look at Jokic right now. He's a brilliant. His understanding of basketball is genius level. Just like Jordan, just like Bird, just like Magic, just like whoever you want to name, just like LeBron, obviously. You know, in soccer especially, like all the great soccer managers from history, when they look at their best players, they go, they're the smartest players. It's just, it really helps to be really smart. And Keith and Mick are both fucking brilliant guys.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to a question I was curious about, and I don't want to sidetrack the conversation overly. And this is only because I don't know that I have an answer. But if you look at the Stones and you look at Zeppelin and you look at the Who and all these other great rock bands that have these legacies and they're so brilliant and the composition was perfect and the timing was perfect, are there any bands currently doing touring and recording that you see as carrying that torch, carrying on that legacy? Who is the heritage of bands like the Stones right now?
I think well, I haven't cared very much for a lot of recorded music from U2 lately, but I think those guys are brilliant. I mean, I think they've just, for understanding who they were and where they were and their place in the scheme of things, like I think they've had the greatest career that's ever existed because they learned from the 60s and 70s and they applied it to the 80s and 90s and throughout. In the same way Metallica's done that. Those are smart, really good bands. I don't necessarily love their records, but I can certainly look at them and appreciate it. But in terms of just like Jason Isbell's on a bit of a heater right now, I think it's safe to say, and he's got the right band for that. They've just found this incredible groove for, you know, this is 5 or 6 albums now where, and it's at least 4 or 5 with Dave Cobb, where they just have, they've got their thing figured out and it all makes perfect sense. as far as self-awareness in real time goes, I don't know that you can top him right now.
Sure. Yeah. He's probably my favorite guy playing right now. So I love that answer.
Yeah.
Love it.
It's just that idea that you're able to see so much about what's happening around you, and then more importantly, very realistically see your place in it. That's the hardest part.
How, and this is an interesting question, Drew. How do you see bands like the Foo Fighters, and we already mentioned Jack White? Those are people, when you talk about, okay, they're kind of operating on a bit of a different level than most other people are.
Yeah.
How do you see them kind of fitting into that equation?
Well, Foo Fighters have always been, you know, did you guys watch the show Succession?
Yeah,
just wrapped up.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are recognizing, like, oh, I didn't realize the show I was actually watching. It's always been enjoyable and it's always been entertaining. But I heard someone else the other day who said it's just basically been a show for 4 years about broken children. Like, we thought it was about this titans of industry, and it wasn't. It was about clowns who were kidding themselves from the jump. And as much as we all recognize that, we still thought that the brilliance of that show in so many ways was making us all think, well, one of these people's going to win. And it's like, of course they're not. They're all completely useless. I think, and it's, I don't know, I don't really know where I'm going to go with that, but the Foo Fighters, to me, I think the statement they first put out after Taylor died, about when they said they were going to continue, and they said Foo Fighters was a band that was formed out of grief and pain, and music was a way to move forward. So of course we're going to continue to move forward. And that's the time when I just went, oh my God, of course, I lost sight of what this really is from day one. This is a manifestation of a guy trying to figure out, what the fuck do I do now? I just lost my guy. And because when Taylor died, I thought for sure they'll pull the plug. I just thought Dave is that's it. And then of course it makes perfect sense that they wouldn't, because that's where they came from. You know, and I like Foo Fighters records the way a lot of people do, which is some songs I really like and some songs I like, you know, but I don't care about my own taste. I'm the first guy to tell you, like, after a certain point, it takes an awful lot to get me that excited. I'm just pretty, you know, I don't know if it's jaded or just I've heard too many songs, or I just want to go listen to my early Bee Gees records. Whatever it is, I just, you know, but they're certainly one of those. They're as much as Foo Fighters is a band, it's still clearly one guy's vision, and one, you know, it's Dave's show, and that's what it's always been. And I think that we all kind of lost sight of what the whole point was to begin with. And then you mentioned another band. Who else did you say? You said
Jack White.
Oh, I think that he's just a unicorn. He's just unlike anybody that's come before or since. He's a brilliant guy. Literally and figuratively, a completely sober, reasonable person who just looks at all the angles ahead of time and makes decisions that make perfect sense. I think he's brilliant. And the same thing, even if I don't necessarily care for a specific song, I think he always understands his place, and his place more than the Foo Fighters. Jack White's place is often over outside, and, you know, outside looking in, outside trying to crash the party. He's no one's idea of what a pop star should be, or a singular star. But at the same time, he goes out and plays arenas or theaters and amphitheaters, and he just does whatever the hell he wants whenever he wants to. And I think he's always just maintained. I think he's always just had such a great view of the world at large in music and his place in it. And, you know, he's a fascinating dude. He's just a real, and again, Dave and Jack are both two of the smartest dudes in rock I've ever met. They're both brilliant guys. You know, this will sound rude, I guess, but dumb guys don't last long in that game. You know what I mean? It's just really true. In any game, it's no different than business or accounting or marketing. It's like smart guys win. The smart guys hang around.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Any last thoughts on Some Girls?
Just that anybody who hasn't listened to it lately should probably put it on and crank it up. And if you have a little bit of bourbon on the side, that'll probably help.
That doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt
No,
at all.
it's an eternal record. It's never gonna sound tired. It's never gonna sound old. It's never not gonna do the job.
Yeah. I think in a lot of ways it may be the last great Stones album.
Sure, I can see that.
And to say that was 45 years ago. and I don't
and to
I
their
don't mean
credit,
that as a
hey man, they know who they are, they know where they are, they always make the right choice. They've somehow managed to they're still the Rolling fucking Stones.
They are,
even with
and
you
always
saying
will be.
that. Yeah, forever.
Yep. And I know when I say that, it's not like, well, they've been trashed for 45 years. No, not at all. But they had their time where what they were doing was they're playing a different game than what everybody else is playing.
Yeah.
And they found a way to live on that planet for 45 more years.
Yeah. And continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, I saw them in 2021 and there was 60,000 people at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and at least 10,000 of those people were under 15.
Wow.
Think about that.
Right.
It was awesome. And they
people
were
taking
not,
their kids and their grandkids.
And those kids were not displeased. They were all I thought was the kids that are here are having the time of their lives. They love this.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. Drew, any last thoughts on Some Girls?
Yeah, I would echo what Steve said. This is probably the third or fourth Stones record that I have actually taken the time to listen all the way through top to bottom. I don't think it has any misses. Definitely worth your time. And make sure you play it loud. On vinyl is better for this one, I have found. So check it out.
Always. Yeah. Well, Drew, you still have some homework to do, my friend.
I know. I'm playing catch up.
Yeah.
I envy
so
you.
Will we hear a Beast of Burden at a Drew Crawley and the Wild Boys show sometime soon?
It could definitely happen. I've got a little convincing to do from our drummer, maybe, but otherwise, I think I can make it happen.
I can help with that.
All right.
Hey, Steve, man, thank you so much for coming on with us. I knew
of course.
That this was. I thought I had remembered from the old Steve Gorman sports days that you had talked about "Shattered" being your favorite Rolling Stones song.
Oh yeah.
So when I saw that the
always hits me, man. I mean, if I'm in the car and it comes on, or if I'm anywhere, I'm like, oh man. I mean, it's eternal. It's the best.
Well, the 45th anniversary of this album coming out is June the 9th. So take a half hour, 45 minutes, whatever the runtime is on it. Sit down and give it a listen again. It is not stale. It is.
No.
If you've not heard it in 10 or 15 years, and you're a Stones fan, it'll bring back all the warm and fuzzies.
It'll set you free, man. It does the job.
All right, so tell everybody again, first of all, where they can find you here.
Sure. KQRS.com, I guess. I'm not very good with websites and stuff. There's a Facebook page for KQRS, of course. Bagmanband.com is the website. And then the socials are all listed there. And then triggerhippie.com is the website for Trigger Hippie. But, I'm easy to find.
Yeah. And tune in radio if you want to listen to KQRS in the morning. 7 o'clock Eastern time.
I trust your recommendation, sir.
I would not lead you astray. I would not lead you or anyone astray.
Right on.
Drew, where can folks find you?
Yeah, you can find us at drewcrawleymusic.com. That's going to be the most up-to-date on places for shows. As you're hearing this release, it'll be out on the 7th. June 10th here in town, we'll be playing the Loop Festival here in Louisville. So if you're around, come out and see us. I think we're the 4:30 to 6:30 slot. So that'd be great. And then we've got a lot of dates that we'll be finishing announcing here in the next 2 weeks once we finalize things. And then keep your eyes peeled for a new record in November.
Awesome.
Right on.
Our show, you can watch us on YouTube. You can listen to the show on a podcast with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google. You can go to Facebook, follow our page there. That's where we list all of our shows. We post all of our shows there. We've got a Facebook group where people can talk about the things that they are listening to, like Some Girls album on June 9th, or what you're drinking, like maybe a Johnny Drum. So just check that out. And over on Facebook, we're also on Instagram, and we would appreciate you sharing the show with all of your good friends or your enemies. We really don't care. So,
right on.
All right.
Thank you, fellas.
Hey, on behalf of Steve and Drew and myself, until next time, cheers, love, and shadooby.
Cheers.